Let's go bargain hunting. In today's video, we're going to be looking at cheaper suburbs that are surrounded by more expensive suburbs. We're looking at a list of 21 suburbs in Brisbane that are far cheaper than their neighbours. Now, why might you want to look at a cheaper property? Of course, first, it's a cheaper price point to get into, but second, you've got to be looking at the ripple effect of property. If the suburbs are close by, and they have similar amenity, they have similar lifestyles, they're in that very similar location, then you could see the price point and the capital growth increase in the cheaper suburb to catch up with the more expensive suburb over time. As these more expensive suburbs become too costly here in Brisbane, that's where people are going to be looking at these 21 cheaper options. The affordability of these options and the growing demand at these lower price points is what's going to drive demand into these locations. Now, this is something that we do with clients. In our client workbook, we actually share a Google map or a custom map that has a heat map of 3 different price points. It looks at sub $600,000, $600,000 to $900,000, and $900,000 plus, and puts that on a map around Southeast Queensland. You can then see the suburbs that are more expensive, the suburbs that are middle price point, and the lower price point suburbs. And then using the heat map, you can see which suburbs are neighbouring on expensive suburbs and which cheaper suburbs might be a great opportunity. So let's go through these 21 suburbs that are much cheaper than their neighbours, and I'll give you my insights and my insider thoughts being a Brisbane local and a Brisbane-based buyer's agent around some of these opportunities and where they might make sense and where the comparison is not quite there. So bang for buck, 21 Brisbane suburbs much cheaper than their neighbours. Brisbane's best bridesmaid suburbs have been revealed, with new analysis identifying cheap alternatives to more expensive suburbs offering a similar lifestyle for less. New analysis from PropTrack identified the 21 Greater Brisbane suburbs where home buyers could save hundreds of thousands of dollars. So here's our first example. We're looking at a 5-bedroom property in Sherwood that is scheduled for auction, and it's been fully renovated. And then the bridesmaid suburb they picked here is in Rocklea with looks like a little 3-bedder to me for $620,000. Now, I can tell you straight away that Sherwood and Rocklea are not a great comparison. The reason is Rocklea is known as a very commercial and flood-prone area. There's a lot of industrial buildings, there's train tracks, there's commercial buildings, and there's a lot of unrenovated homes and flood-prone properties in that area. Sherwood, on the other hand, is a little bit closer to the river, but also is a bit more elevated. There's a lot of nicer homes in that area. So I know it's a bridesmaid suburb in this case, but Rocklea wouldn't be one of my picks on this list. Similarly, the median home price in Brisbane's most expensive suburb, Tenerife, is currently a whopping $3.85 million. But minutes away is Spring Hill, where the median is $1.36 million. Savvy buyers can expect to pay a third of that price. Now, they've got, again, 2 photos here. A 5-bedroom property that's going for $3.95 million here in Tenerife. And then we've got a comparison here of 77 Coningo Street, Spring Hill, which is obviously around that median of $1.3 to $1.5 million. Now, when you're comparing a more expensive to a cheaper suburb, you need to make sure you're comparing like for like in terms of the property. Realestate.com has picked crazy expensive 5-bedroom homes and compared them to smaller homes in the cheaper alternative. You need to try and look at the same land size, the same bedrooms and bathrooms, and work out where the value or where the price point lies between those 2 comparable properties. You don't want to be comparing like they've got here, a 5-bedroom home in Tenerife that could be on a much larger block compared to a Spring Hill property, which are typically on 200 to 300 square meters. So small blocks and hence the smaller price. And also it looks like this could be a 2 to 3 bedroom little workers cottage compared to a 5-bed palatial home in Tenerife. Now, for me, an accurate comparison to Tenerife is more likely New Farm, which is still $1 million cheaper than Tenerife and has very similar lifestyle opportunities. Spring Hill might be close to Tenerife in proximity, but it doesn't get the benefits of the amenities, the river, the parklands. Spring Hill's on the northern side of the CBD and doesn't have the same access to the amenities, the gasworks and things like that Tenerife has. So this is where these articles can potentially trick you into thinking there's great opportunities, but you need to be looking at like for like to make sure you're making a fair comparison. Now, here's an example of a couple that's actually made the move from a more expensive suburb to a cheaper option. So Dimitri and Holly Stefanos have just sold their home in Paddington for $3.05 million to relocate to a bigger property in a more affordable suburb to accommodate the arrival of their second child in a few weeks. The couple, who already had their son, Leonard, 2, have bought a larger home on a bigger block in Ashgrove for a similar price to what they have achieved for their property at 70 Upper Cairns Terrace. We're going to that area to take advantage of being able to get more bang for your buck. We've gone from a steep 506 square metre block to an 809 square metre flat double block. So these are some owner occupiers trading out of the Paddington market and moving into the Ashgrove market, getting more bang for their buck in terms of the property that they can get when you compare Paddington to Ashgrove in this example. Wearing an investor cap and looking at this as an example when they've switched from Paddington on 500 square metres to Ashgrove on 800 square metres, you've got to look at the levers and the opportunities to add value as well. So if you're going to Ashgrove and you buy that 809 square metres, if the property has subdivision potential, you've got a reasonable frontage, and you could potentially subdivide that property down the track and create value, that's where, from an investment point of view, getting that cheaper suburb or that bridesmaid suburb could see a great opportunity for you to hold over the mid to long term, and then release that strategy or pull that lever at a point in time when it makes sense for you, or you've got the funds to actually complete a subdivision. So now we've seen some photos and looked at some examples. Let's go through the list of 21 suburbs where we've got more expensive versus the cheaper options, and I'll give you some of my thoughts on the comparisons between these suburbs. So this is from PropTrack's data, and to kick off the list was Sherwood versus Rocklea. Again, not a fair comparison in my opinion. Rocklea flood prone and got some commercial areas, and Sherwood is a very nice suburb on the water and closing in on Indooroopilly. We talked through Tenerife and Spring Hill. Now Pullenvale and Kenmore, I think that's probably more of a fair comparison. Both of these suburbs are acreage style lands or 800 square metre, 1,000 square metre blocks, and Kenmore is much better value in my opinion at the median price point of $1 million, as long as you're comparing apples with apples in terms of the home. Capera versus Bunya. I also like this comparison. Capera's got a great value for money. People are cottoning on that Capera's got good value in terms of its location, the train line, the schools, the shops, the parklands around there. Bunya's out near the reserve, which makes sense that it's a bit more expensive because people are backing onto the Bunya Reserve or the forest that's there. And so I think that is a good comparison, and I would be going for Capera and the cheapest suburb. Running our eye down the list, number 5 is Robertson versus Salisbury. I think Salisbury is a great opportunity compared to Robertson. Robertson, the homes are probably overpriced on slightly larger blocks of land, and Salisbury is really gentrifying and has continued to gentrify over the last few years. Ascot versus Wooloowin. Ascot's obviously known as one of the premier suburbs here in Brisbane. I think Ascot has the best primary school in Brisbane, depending on who you ask. And similar with Grange and Stafford. So again, I like these comparisons. You've got Seven Hills versus Carina. Now, Carina is a little bit further out than Seven Hills. Seven Hills and Morningside are very trendy and have that very blue chip appeal. Carina and Carina Heights, again, looking like better value at the $1 million mark. We've got Brookfield versus The Gap. Now, I'm not sure why there's so much hype on The Gap. It seems a little bit siloed on the western side of Brisbane CBD, so it wouldn't be one of my picks, but again, there's a good price disparity there. Let's jump over to number 12, which is Chandler versus Capella Bar. This is a terrible comparison. Everyone that's local pretty much knows that Chandler is one of the largest acreage areas in southeast Queensland. And the properties, or the average property in Chandler, is not comparable to the average property in Capella Bar. Capella Bar, you're going to be looking at 600 to 700 square metres for the average family home, and you're looking at a 3-bed or a 4-bed home. Whereas in Chandler, you're probably looking at a 4-bed, 2-bath home for the average home, maybe on 2,000 or 4,000 square metres for the average property. So not really a good comparison between these two price points. So that's where this list, when you go more expensive versus cheaper, you need to look at those like-for-like properties and the access to amenities and where that ripple effect's going to take place. Interesting here. 13 is another good example. So Stretton versus Woodridge. Now, Stretton has a very multicultural vibe. There's a lot of very expensive homes in that area. So a lot of people have invested a lot of money into the homes in Stretton, and the school in Stretton is quite well regarded. Now, Woodridge, on the other hand, hasn't had that type of investment. So although you could buy, say, for $500,000, Woodridge has been known for a long period of time, 20, 25 years, as a lower socioeconomic area with slightly higher crime rates. And so it's not really comparable to Stretton as getting that ripple effect or getting the benefits of Stretton's amenities, because the school zone is mapped out in Stretton. So Woodridge is not getting into Stretton's school zone. And the money that's gone into Stretton is unlikely to go into Woodridge. Here's one that I like. Number 16 is Rochdale versus Rochdale South. Again, local knowledge would tell you that Rochdale has a lot of new builds. Those fancy developers, the Metricons, and guys who want to do $1.5 million, $2 million homes are building those types of homes in Rochdale. We have a lot of overseas migrants who move into Rochdale because they like brand new homes and they like the area. So Rochdale South is a more established suburb on the northern side of Logan City Council, whereas Rochdale is one of the most southern sides on Brisbane City Council. I think Rochdale South is going to continue to benefit from the investment that's going into Rochdale. And when the Brisbane Metro gets put in, that's not only going to bring benefits to Rochdale and Rochdale South, but a lot of surrounding suburbs along that metro line. All the way from Greenslopes, Holland Park, Mount Gravatt, down to 8 Mile Plains, and Rochdale South, because they'll be able to park at the park and ride at 8 Mile Plains and catch the Metro Express in towards the city. Now, again, another unfair comparison is Brisbane Downs versus Fitzgibbon. Fitzgibbon was actually a really large subdivision a long time ago in Brisbane. So about 35 years ago, Fitzgibbon was subdivided into one of those smaller land estates. So a lot of the blocks there are 400, 450, 500 square meters, whereas Brisbane Downs, you're typically going to see for the average property an 800 or 1,000 square meter block. So not like for like, and Fitzgibbon is actually closer to the CBD than Brisbane Downs is, but Brisbane Downs would have far more expensive properties. But I don't see that being a great bridesmaid or cheaper suburb. They're not like for like, and so they're not a fair comparison. Now, to close this list out with number 21, we've got Sandgate and Bald Hills. Now, Sandgate is on the water at the end of the train line near Sandgate and Shorncliffe. And Bald Hills, don't get me wrong, I think is a great suburb. I've actually mentioned it in my previous suburb by suburb videos. Bald Hills and Bracken Ridge are far cheaper and they're a little bit more inland, but they're not necessarily like for like. You've got very nice homes on the water near a train line in Sandgate, and you've got homes that are in more suburban areas in Bald Hills and Bracken Ridge. They've got access to the lifestyle, so that is a fair comparison that you can drive 10 minutes over to the Bayside and enjoy fish and chips by the water and enjoy the lifestyle that the Bayside has to offer, but they're not exactly a fair comparison. I would say Brighton is a much better comparison to Sandgate because it's a couple of suburbs further north and probably $200,000 to $300,000, about $200,000 cheaper at this point in time than Sandgate. When it comes to looking at the gentrification story and the value opportunities in those cheaper suburbs, it's important to understand the fundamentals of those locations. This knowledge comes from two areas. You need to look at quantitative data of the suburbs and you need to look at qualitative data. Now, the quantitative data we can all get access to. You can go onto the ABS, you can go onto SQM, you can go onto CoreLogic, you can go into other resources and pull this information together yourself. You can look at the median price points, the incomes in those areas, the forecast incomes of those areas, what the days on market of the properties are. Now, on the qualitative side, that's where I've been able to give you guys and share some knowledge around each of these suburb comparisons and where they might be fair comparisons and when they're not really realistic comparisons when you're looking at a more expensive versus a cheaper suburb. So this qualitative data, using Stretton as an example, we were talking about the school zones, the walk score, the lifestyle, the crime rates, the look and feel of the suburb, comparing Stretton to Woodridge in that earlier example. So Stretton has a better school zone. It has far more expensive homes. It has nicer parklands. Whereas Woodridge generally has lower socioeconomics. It has a higher crime rate. And so they're not apples for apples comparisons. So that's where we need to look at both the quantitative and the qualitative data to make an educated and an informed decision. Now, I've been having chats in my regular sessions that we offer. We offer free strategy sessions. So if you head over to purposeproperty.com.au, you can book in a free session with myself. And in these chats, a lot of the questions come around, Luke, what is the growth rate going to be of this suburb or this suburb? Can you give us a guarantee or confidence around a 6% or a 7% or a 9% capital growth rate? Now, property doesn't move in a linear fashion, and you should be investing in property for a longer term vision. So at least 7 years, 10 years, 15 years plus. Now, given that, when you're looking at that long-term horizon, that's where we need to make that educated and an informed decision. We can use modeling to map out capital growth at 6 to 7 to 8%, but you need to make an educated and an informed decision based on the data, based on the quantitative data and the qualitative data. And that's where myself and my team here at Purpose Property can help people looking to buy in the Southeast Queensland market. We can bring together the data both on that quantitative and qualitative side, educate you, walk you through the process in terms of your buying brief, and then narrow down the right property for the right price in the right location that suits your buying brief. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments below which suburb you think is the best cheap suburb in this list of 21 suburbs. If you want to see an example of a 1,000 square meter block of a cheaper suburb purchase with that gentrification potential, then click this video over here. Thanks for sticking around. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.